Hi, my name's Danelle. I'll be 63 here in a couple of months. And one thing I've been hearing quite often actually from people my age or older than I is that there were things they wanted to do in life or that they were interested in, but they never tried them. And they sometimes kind of regret that, or they still want to do it, but they're hesitating. And I've always lived in a way where I tend to just jump into new things, hard things, sometimes things that are too difficult for me, some things I'm not prepared for. But having that habit of mine, that tendency, has actually brought me some really amazing successes and adventures, and yes, some failures too. So I thought I'd share with you some tips today how to be more brave about jumping in and just trying things, and also maybe to avoid some of the pitfalls that I fell into over the years. I was raised by really young parents. They were 17 years old when I was born, and they had just a natural sense of adventure and courage and just trying different things. My dad, when I was about 4 years old, so he must have been about 20, 21 years old, he decided that he wanted to try farming. He had never farmed before. And so he bought this old dairy farm in eastern Washington state. So we lived there for a while and we enjoyed the great outdoors, and he loved fixing and running the tractors and things, but he decided that that wasn't quite what he wanted to do. He had just earned an electronics technician, I think it was like an associate's degree, so he really wanted to work with his hands and do work like that. And he got a job with a company based in Seattle that was doing underwater salvage with these 100-foot steel boats, and they would go out and retrieve sunken vessels. They got a contract with the U.S. Navy to retrieve torpedoes that were lying on the ocean floor after testing, and we moved to Vancouver Island, Nanaimo, BC, when I was 5 years old, so that he could do that work, and he did that for a year, and that's why I went to kindergarten. That's why I learned to ice skate, because that's what everybody does in Canada, right? They ice skate, apparently. So we did that for about a year, and then the company kind of expanded. They started retrieving more sunken vessels. He went on one of those boats up to Alaska. That's before we lived in Alaska. I was just a little kid. And they were retrieving sunken crab boats and working boats up here in Alaska. My dad was in charge of the underwater cameras. He was the one who kept them running and fixed them when there were problems. They also retrieved some sunken airplanes. Many years later, they were doing underwater cables. They were laying those and providing the camera work, and so we did that later when I was a teenager. But other things that we did is he liked investing in property, so he bought this very old rundown property in eastern Washington. It wasn't a farm, but it was very rundown, and so he wanted to remodel that to make some money. And he still was going back and forth to work with the underwater salvage company while he did that. He also bought a couple of apartment buildings, and he used us kids. There was me, as the oldest, there was my sister, 4 years younger, and my little brother, he's 11 years younger. But my sister and I, he often employed as sort of his everyday labor. We would do things like staining the wood, or I did a lot of work on the sheetrock, just filling nail holes, things like that over the years. And that did teach me about working hard and how to be patient with very tedious, hard labor. He also had me digging ditches, and he had us out chopping wood a lot. When it was time to put a new roof on that house, he decided what better way to do that than to combine it with an adventure. So we took this old state dump truck that he had bought up to the mountains, and we actually cut cedar trees down and we sawed them into bolts, and then he had us kids hauling these bolts of cedar. We were the ones who hauled it into the truck, and we would spend 12 hours a day doing that. Brought them home and then split them into cedar shakes to put on the roof, and he would keep me home from school to be up on the roof with him helping to put these shakes on. So we were always doing something, And during that time, when I was about 7 years old, my dad fell in love with sailboats. And we lived in eastern Washington, which is not on the ocean at all, but there was a really big lake nearby, Coeur d'Alene Lake in Idaho. So we started sailing there. We bought a little 26-foot sailboat, and that's where he got the love of sailing. So his next big project, his next big dream was that, well, we love sailing so much, we should move onto a sailboat and live on the sailboat. He really wanted to retire at the age of 30, so he was willing to just work hard and work all of us hard to finish all the remodeling on these properties that he had bought. He had us doing all kinds of work. I was in charge of painting the barn, hauling gravel to get our driveway all fixed up. And he had us, like I said, doing sheetrock work. And my sister was quite a bit younger, but he could always find a job that one of us could do. So even though we complained about it and we were, oh, we're just slave labor, as kids would be, it did kind of teach us that we could do anything. We were just little kids, but I could haul gravel up and down the driveway for 6 hours a day if I had to. I could be out there chopping kindling all day. We could be out in the weather, winter, summer, and we could handle it. So in some ways, those were good lessons, just to be tough. And if it's bad weather, you put on better clothes. If it's too hot outside, you bring some nice cold water. So he did teach us that. And so we worked really hard to get that old farmhouse fixed up and painted and ready to sell. We sold, gave away most of our items, and all 5 of us moved onto a 30-foot sailboat. And I think I have a picture I can share with you that I'll put up there. And so my dad didn't like doing things just the easy way. He liked doing things sometimes the hard way, unnecessarily, but he liked to be creative. He didn't want to pay a trucking service to bring that sailboat all the way from eastern Washington to Seattle, Washington, to where we wanted to get there because the company he still worked for, the salvage company, is based in Seattle. So we wanted to get the boat to Seattle where we could start living on the boat and he could still continue to work for this company. It was kind of an intermittent off and on job. So he wasn't really going to fully retire. He was still going to do these intermittent jobs with that company. So what he decided to do is, and it was a little bit crazy, is use that old state dump truck that we had and get a specially built trailer that he kind of remodeled to be strong enough to carry a 30-foot sailboat. And we drove it from Spokane, Washington, where we lived, down these long hills through the Palouse Hills in southeast Washington, and down to Lewiston, Idaho, where the Snake River is. And there's a dam there and it had some docks. So that's where we first moved onto the sailboat. And I remember driving that truck with him when we were hauling the sailboat, and the brakes started smoking on the way down. Things were going crazy. My mom was following with my siblings in our smaller car, and we had to stop, let the brakes cool off. My dad was stressing out, of course. It was a big drama, but it worked out. And that's just one of the many memories I have of my dad just deciding he was going to do something. It sounded too hard. People told him it would be unsafe to have kids on a sailboat, living on a sailboat. People would tell him it was too hard to bring a sailboat with an old state dump truck down all these hills to the dam, that he should just get it hauled to Seattle by a commercial company. But my dad was confident he could do it. He knew there'd probably be difficulties, which there were, but it worked out. We moved on the boat and we sailed down the Snake River through all of the locks and dams that are there. We had all kinds of adventures. These dams are immense. They're about 100 feet high, and when they open the big doors to let you in, this intense current comes out, and we just had a weak little outboard. And one time our outboard died right when they opened the doors, and there was a huge tugboat carrying a barge load of grain next to us, so we were drifting into them, and my dad was frantically trying to start the outboard, and at the very last minute the boat the engine started and we were able to go into the locks. And that was another big responsibility that taught us a lot as kids. Is it was my job, for instance, being the oldest girl, I got a lot of the jobs, and my mom was actually kind of more in charge of doing the cooking and the cleaning, and she was a stay-at-home mom and just kind of caretaking my brother, who was only 4 years old at the time. So we go into these locks, and I was in charge of being on the deck with the lines, and there would be a person up on top that would throw down a line, and I would have to tie it up really quick and securely enough because of that really rough current. So I learned a lot about doing tough things, very uncomfortable things in bad weather, all kinds of situations, and those are really great lessons. So we sailed down the Snake River, down the Columbia River. All of us got, except my dad, got seasick at the mouth of the Columbia River, the Columbia Bar, where it meets the ocean. It's just very rolly. And we got seasick, and we were all kind of dizzy. I remember my dad asked me to get something out of one of our lockers that's underneath the seats. I didn't even notice our little fluffy dog was standing there because I was feeling so bad. I lifted it up and the dog launched into the water. And we got the dog, and my dad had stopped he wanted to fish, and he didn't care that all of us were deathly ill. My dad was very driven. He didn't really care about small problems. We also were running behind. We had other engine problems when we were coming down the river, so we had to get a new engine. And so we stopped at a town that was near Seattle, actually on the Washington, outside of the Washington coast. And then my dad had to take a plane over to Seattle because he was kind of late for this job that was starting. So the rest of us were staying in this little town of La Push, Washington. But my dad had to get up at about 4 a.m. And on this little boat, of course, all of us were awake because you can't do anything on a 30-foot boat without waking someone up or disturbing someone else. And he was getting ready to go use the bathroom, and you had this flush toilet that you pump. And we could hear that going, and pretty soon it was slower and slower and slower and slower. And then all of a sudden we hear this big wet explosion in there. So here it is, 5 a.m. My dad is trying desperately to get to his job, and it turns out my 4-year-old brother had dropped his sock in the toilet, and the toilets on boats are very, very finicky. You can't do things like that. Nobody knew that he had dropped the sock in there till that morning. It had just slowly gone down and down and down and down until that morning when the pressure just exploded the pipes and exploded sewage all over my dad and the bathroom. So that was one of many very exciting boat stories. The boat stories, and I have many, and other challenges we had coming down the rivers is that the bottoms of the rivers shift a lot. So even though we had charts to show us where the river was deep enough for us, because the sailboat had a fairly long keel, so it drew quite a bit of water. We did get grounded a few times. We had to call the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And so we just had all these challenges. I think some of the biggest lessons that I learned and that I can share with you and that I took into adulthood from living on the boat, and over all 5 years of living on the boat, we started with the 30-foot sailboat. We moved onto a 36-foot sailboat that was much roomier after we got to Seattle. And then we eventually moved to the 50-foot sailboat that we, in 81, sailed from Seattle up here to Alaska. And that's how I got to Ketchikan, Alaska, was on our sailboat. I'll show you a picture of our family right after we arrived. Is that, first of all, you don't need to listen to naysayers who tell you that it's just not going to work. Oh, it's going to be too crowded and you'll hate it. Oh, it'll be too hard. There's no way you can do it. They're speaking from their experience. I think that listening to advice from people, those 1 or 2 people that really understand your vision, they really understand your personality, your limitations, I think listening to those people can be very valuable. Sometimes I have been guilty of getting advice from people, really good advice, and I just ignored it and then I regretted it. So there is that balance there. I think that you will have challenges. It depends on how big of a challenge you take on. If you decide to learn to play guitar, you're not going to have the big dramatic things like your engine breaking down while a 100-foot tugboat is swirling into a giant whirlpool into your little boat. You won't have big disasters like that. But when you take on any dream that you want to do, I wanted to play violin for a long time. So when a violin teacher finally moved to Ketchikan, I started taking lessons. And the stakes just aren't as high there, but still there's a lot of fear of embarrassment, because here I was 40 years old at the time. I was like, oh, I'm so old, and now I'm learning to play an instrument and I'm gonna look silly. Then she asked me to be in a recital, and I did a duo with this kid. I was 40, he was, I think, 14 or something at the time. And I felt kind of silly. I also, during the recital, happened to be 8 months pregnant. So I just felt like I looked silly. But you know what? I did it anyway. And people loved it. And I think they admired me for having the courage to get up there and do it. I forgot I totally froze during one of the pieces that I had memorized. So that trying new things, yeah, you're probably going to be embarrassed. When I became a firefighter, that was kind of accidental. I signed up as a volunteer at our fire department in 2013, and I wanted to be an EMT. I wanted to do the medical stuff. But one day I went in for one of our drills, and they said, we have your turnouts to try on. I said, turnouts? Firefighting? And they said, yeah, today's the day that we fit you. And I said, well, I'm 50 and I'm small and I'm not super strong. And they're like, no, that's okay, you can do it. And so I thought, okay, because that's my habit. I'm just like, okay, I like to say yes to things. And being a firefighter, it turned out to be my favorite thing. I liked it way better than the medical side of being a volunteer at the fire department. And I not only became an actual firefighter who was able to go into buildings, I became the highest level of firefighting. Yes, you are going to have to, if you have a dream or goal that is pretty high, you might have to suffer for it, and I did. I found out through firefighting that I have a very strong claustrophobia response, and you have to, in the upper levels, you have to do a lot of blackout, crawling around in heat and 60-pound gear, and in the dark. So they'll put you in a smoky container, and they'll put furniture and things in your way, and you have to crawl through it, and it was really scary. I had to work through it. So I went and watched some videos on YouTube about overcoming claustrophobia as a firefighter, and so I was able to get there. So you may, depending on what kind of goal you have, even if it is something as simple as playing an instrument, like playing the violin, I practiced every day for an hour, and there were some songs that I never could quite get. It was just, I felt like I couldn't get the coordination of moving both hands fast enough for some of the phrases. One thing that's really helped me in achieving really big goals, tough goals, things that maybe I'm not naturally going to be as good at, is that I will get a piece of paper and I will literally break down that goal into very, very, very small steps. So that's something that really, really helped me, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. I also was a search and rescue canine handler for 30 years. I just recently stepped back from that. And when I started, I had never done that before, and our team, I was one of the founding members, so we had no mentors in our team to help us. And there were a lot of frustrations with the other members. So what I did is, the internet was a little not quite as up and running back then, so I used email a lot. This is where reaching out to ask for help. I reached out to some very experienced people down in the Washington State area to ask them, this is happening, what do I do? This is happening, what do I do? And the original dog I had wasn't really working out, so then I had to make the decision of getting a different dog, which I did. I found one at the local shelter who was an incredible dog. But training a search and rescue dog, if you do everything right and you're experienced, it can take about 2 years. So it's a very long goal. So I broke it down into tiny steps. What can I do today? Today's training goal is this. Things like, today we are going to practice finding someone who is covered in a bunch of sticks so the dog can't see them. Today we're going to focus on finding a person who is wearing the clothes they wore when they skinned out a deer that they had shot while hunting. So the smell is really overwhelming. My first dog was pretty scared of that the first time she found a hunter. So every single step, and then I would break down those steps into even smaller steps. Like we're going to find someone doing this, and then I am going to be looking in my pack. So the dog had to come back and learn to be really confident to tell me I found somebody no matter what I was doing. So it was hundreds of little tiny steps. So if you have a goal of playing guitar well enough to be able to perform with your church, for instance, then that's your ultimate goal. You see yourself up there making everyone so happy and smiling at you, and your family's proud, and you are singing and playing a song in front of your church. How can you get those steps backward? And performing in front of people can be pretty scary. A YouTube channel, it hits so many different skills. For instance, just talking on camera, which is one of the things I've had to work the very hardest on. It's editing skills, camera work skills, deciding what kind of gear you want to use. Do you want to use your phone? Do you want to buy a camera? There's so much to learn. How do you even upload? And how often should you upload? There's just so much to learn. And that is another thing that is great for an older person, is the stimulating your brain by trying new things. There's a lot of ideas out there, such as, do a lot of crossword puzzles, do a lot of reading, things like that, that are really great for your brain. But it's even better, and I've done some research, I have a couple links I'll share below, that to try new things, because trying new things is actually more valuable for your brain health and building your brain's resilience than doing a skill you already know a lot. Even if it's a really hard skill, even if you are an amazing sculptor and you've been doing that for 40 years, that is difficult, and creativity is awesome for your brain. I'll do a video on that one too, on creativity. But doing something brand new, it just really stimulates your brain. And I have a big interest in avoiding dementia, as I'm sure you do too. So let's say you try out this thing that you've always been wanting to do. You decide to join the fire department, and let's say you are fearful that you won't like it. But that's okay. If you don't like it, you're allowed to stop. You can resign and you can go do something else. Maybe you would like to volunteer at a hospice. Maybe you would like to join the local theater group. So there's so many things you can do. It's okay to quit. I have quit things many times. When I was very young, I bought a retail art store. I had just graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting. So I thought, I don't know how to make a living as just selling my art. There was no internet back in 1987. So you had to go to these galleries, and I'm still intimidated by galleries. They just seem so fancy. As you can tell by my boat story and my family story, I wasn't raised in a family that was really artsy and into the high class stuff. We lived out in the country. We were kind of a rough and tumble sort of family. I bought an art store with a nonprofit foundation that helped to fund the purchase of that, and then they also helped me a little bit with knowing how to run it, even how to talk on the phone, things like that. But I had zero retail experience. I had worked in a retail store here in Ketchikan for one summer, and that was the extent of my retail experience. And so I bought that store, and I was almost immediately, from the first week, I was terrified. I almost felt paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how much I should order of different supplies. And I got so frozen, like I was too scared to even change my window display. I felt so overwhelmed. And that is a good example of, I'm proud of myself for just saying, I'm gonna go for this opportunity, because that's just what I tend to do. And I think it was very brave of me, and it was an excellent lesson. But it also made me feel really, really bad because I only lasted a year and I closed down the store, and then I had to pay, of course, my loans back, which wasn't terribly hard, but I came back up to Alaska with my then boyfriend and worked at a fishing resort, a remote fishing resort, in the housekeeping department, and every cent of money I made that summer went to pay off the retail store. So sometimes you're gonna jump into things and you'll find that either you weren't prepared well or it just doesn't suit you. One thing I didn't like was just being stuck in the store all day. I have a really hard time with just being stuck in one place. I work from home now for the newspaper, so I like working from home. I don't like being stuck in some other space all day. So sometimes you will make it wasn't the right choice, but guess what? You can always drop out. You can change course. Maybe you can change your approach. Maybe you didn't like playing guitar. Maybe it hurt your hands and it was annoying. Maybe you didn't like the way it sounded. Sometimes with violin, it was just too loud and annoying. Maybe a quieter instrument. Maybe just shift a little bit. Maybe just play a different instrument. Maybe just try a slightly different hobby. So I hope some of these ideas help you. I love getting out and adventuring. I love saying yes to things. And right now, I mentioned in the first video on this channel, I'm making a huge move. We are moving out of this Southeast Alaska town and this house I've lived in for 30 years. We have a lot of traditions here. We have a lot of roots here, and it's pretty scary. We're going to move, I say down south. Everywhere is down south here, anywhere south of Canada. Probably to somewhere in Washington State. Possibly Arizona. We haven't decided yet. My sons live in the house with me. They're also going. So this is another big scary jump. Maybe this is the scariest one because I don't really know where I'm going. I don't have a house already settled. So it's another big scary jump, but one thing I am doing is starting this channel because it's helping me be a little less scared of it. I can talk to you guys about it. I'm hoping I can get some ideas from you if you have relocated, if you've made a big restart. What have you done that was scary and that you succeeded at or maybe failed at? Do you have ideas? Do you have tips to make it easier for people? So do you think that you're too old to try new things? Do you have some fear of trying something you've always kind of wanted to try? I would love to hear your experiences. I'd love to hear your ideas. I'm excited about my new adventures and seeing what I can do next. I'm thinking that I would like to take my border collies and do some sheep herding lessons when I get down there. Not any big stakes. I can just take some lessons, see how I like it. So anyway, love to hear from you. Thanks for being here. Take care.